So when it comes to digital advertising, personalization and privacy are often presented as two concepts that are at odds with one another. But that isn't the case. Privacy and personalized ads can coexist. Businesses must innovate their data practices now to meet people's expectations around relevancy and privacy. And as Kieran already kindly introduced me, my name is Kaidi, and I'm a privacy program manager at Facebook. I'm part of a global team of privacy program managers, and our mission is to guide Facebook teams to the right decisions on privacy. And prior to joining Facebook, I was working as a product manager on various consumer and business technology products, such as in companies such as Zoopla, Be Global, and BBC, to name a few. And currently at Facebook, I steer the product teams in ads and commerce to make the right decisions about privacy. And today, I'm really excited to talk to you about personalization and privacy in advertising. Some of the actions businesses can take to achieve this balance, and the future developments in technologies that will help enhance this. So let's begin with personalization. People have infinite choices, but expect messages from brands that are personal to them, as well as having total control over what they watch, what they read, interact with, and buy. There are about 4.5 billion active internet users and 3.4 billion mobile phone internet users today, and no two people care about the same things. People expect that their experiences are tailored to their tastes and in the formats they prefer. So I'm sure it is no surprise to you that these personalized experiences are powered by data, which allows businesses to get a view of the journey people take on the way to a download, purchase, or to play a game. And because of all of that data, you can reach people with the right message at the right time in their journey, from the moment they first discover your product or brand through to consideration and evaluation. And then if that message is compelling and relevant enough, to the point where they're inspired to purchase your product or install your app, and even make a further purchase to buy some of your services or products. And we also know that personalized advertising is effective, and it brings value to people by connecting them to products and experiences they love. In fact, 91% of consumers have said that they're more likely to shop with brands who recognize, remember, and provide them with relevant offers and recommendations. But while people benefit from personal experiences, they also want more privacy. People want their personal data to be protected, and they also expect the industry to provide the transparency and the choice into data use, and to then respect those choices. The advertising ecosystem is rapidly evolving in an effort to meet these privacy expectations. The state and regional governments, as well as tech companies, are driving substantial changes on the privacy front. In just the last few years, we've seen significant regulations put in place across the world to help in this space. From GDPR here in the EU to LGPD in Brazil and CCPA in California, to just name a few. Cookies have begun to slowly become limited by web browsers and are expected to no longer be supported by 2023. And currently, the industry is working to adapt to changes that are imposed by Apple in their iOS 14 update, which requires app developers to ask for permission to track their consumers across the web and apps. And more recently, Google also announced their plans to ask people for permission to use Android device identifiers for advertising. So let's dig a little bit deeper into how the regulations I mentioned are intended to put people in more control of their information. So as mentioned, the more prominent examples of recent regulations are GDPR, CCPA, and LGPD. The GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, has created consistent data protection rules across Europe, including how companies handle and manage the collection, storage, use, and deletion of data. And the CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act, which went into effect in January 2020. And it, one, requires businesses to provide information about how the California consumers' personal information is collected, used, shared, and sold. And two, it gives the California consumers the ability to submit requests to businesses about their data practices, including the requests that their data to be deleted. And thirdly, it also introduces new obligations for businesses that sell their data. For instance, allowing consumers to opt out of their sale of data. And lastly, the LGPD, the Lei Geral de Proteção de Dados, is Brazil's data protection regulation that came into effect in September 2020. And LGPD governs how companies collect, use, and disclose and process personal data. And it applies to companies that process this data belonging to people in Brazil. So these regulations are only the beginning, and we expect to see more legislation like this to go into effect around the globe in the future. So this is a lot of change, and it can be hard to manage. And it goes without saying that this is affecting your ability to reach people with the right message at the right time when they're most likely to be interested. So I want to give you 3 really quick tips on how you can better provide transparency and control to users on your platforms. So companies must give people the visibility and ability to change how the data is used, use tools that reflect people's privacy choices, and source their data in new ways that creates real value across the consumer journey. So what can you do? 1, give people transparency and control about how their data is managed. Make it easy for people to understand how their data is shared and used by your business. And don't presume. Explain for low digital literacy, and make sure you tie the consent to real world examples and the value to help people understand what the trade-offs are to consenting to data use. Second, use tools that reflect people's privacy choices. Implement products such as the Conversions API to establish channels that are browser independent, and use tools that strengthen the sharing of the app data, such as the Facebook SDK and the App Events API, to help use the data to inform personalized advertising and the ecosystem of mobile measurement partners. And thirdly, create real value across the customer journey. Explore data collection through valuable experience such as rewards, exclusive items, etc. And prioritize the information that can help connect websites and app activity to users. And also make sure you understand how that data is acquired, used, and stored, and be sure to have all the consent necessary to share it. So having spoken about the regulatory challenges and having given you some tips as businesses you can take, next I want to share with you some of the future developments at Facebook that we believe will enhance and honor people's privacy in the personalization that they get online in digital advertising. So at Facebook, we are adapting, and we want to help businesses to adapt to the changing ads ecosystem. So we're rebuilding our systems, and we're investing in a multi-year effort to build a portfolio of technologies that will minimize the amount of personal information we process, while still allowing us to show relevant ads and measure their effectiveness. And these are called privacy enhancing technologies, or PETs. Some of those can protect the person's data by removing what would identify a person and combining it with multiple data points. In some situations, they can help ensure that personal data cannot be connected back to a person's account. And they can work together as a portfolio of solutions to address privacy concerns. So at Facebook, we're exploring ways to combine data points from different people so that no data point can be connected back to a specific individual with certainty. And here, how this comes to life. Companies will use privacy enhancing technologies to deliver and measure personalized ads. Multi-party computation will help deliver campaign performance without revealing people's personally identifiable data. And on-device learning trains an algorithm from insights processed directly on your device without sending individual data, such as the item you purchased, or PII, such as your email address, to a remote server or cloud. And this technology could help us find new ways to show people relevant ads without needing to ever learn about specific actions that the individuals take on other web apps and websites. And this will help businesses leverage the power of machine learning without the person's identifiable data leaving their device. The potential of on-device learning is promising. Even though this technology is still relatively new, on-device learning can already recover up to 46% of the ads value in the transition away from fully identifiable third-party conversion data. And results like these give us confidence that these kinds of technologies will support a future where all businesses can use more aggregated and anonymized data to give people the best experiences possible online. We do want to make it clear, though, that no single technology will solve all use cases, and it will take a spectrum of approaches, which is why we are investing in a spectrum of solutions. But all of this can't be achieved by one single company. This technology needs businesses, publishers, and developers of all sizes. For example, Facebook has been working with industry groups such as the Partnership for Responsible and Addressable Media and the World Wide Web Consortium to develop a shared set of standards so that privacy-enhancing technologies can work for businesses, for publishers, and developers of all sizes. And as part of that, we're investing in the following 4 areas. We're Facebook product testing with some selected advertisers, some of those early stage privacy enhancing technologies, such as our private computation lift solution. And also we're open sourcing some of that code. By open sourcing the code, like we've done with blind signatures and our private computation framework, other players in the industry can utilize what we've learned to build their own solutions. And thirdly, co-building solutions. Some solutions will require a consortium, like the work we've done with the World Federation of Advertisers to develop a cross-channel reach measurement solution that works for multiple parties within the ecosystem. And it's important to us that we're not just building products that will benefit Facebook, that we can also support the entire ecosystem with the privacy-focused solutions. Lastly, education. In order for people, businesses, regulators, and people to trust the solutions, they must also understand it. And we're investing in educating the industry on the benefits of this technology. So to recap, as you can see, privacy and personalization can, in fact, coexist. And the move to privacy is the next evolution in digital advertising. So if businesses give people to transparency and control, using the tools that reflect people's privacy choices and create real value on the customer journey, they are well on their way. And with the privacy enhancing technology solutions, we can make it even more robust. So thank you very much for Kieran and the team at Hallam for giving me the opportunity to speak to you all. And thank you all in the audience for your attention.
Thank you so much for that, Cardi. Some really great insight as well. I made a few notes myself on, the way you're talking about how the landscape in Brazil is likely to sort of, go international and sort of, it's interesting how we can look at certain markets and see what's next. And I think those three tips that you made reference to as well were invaluable: the transparency and control, the tools that reflect the person's choices, and then also that value exchange. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about value exchange in a moment. For those watching at home, I can see there's been a couple of questions already. Please feel free to pop your questions in the comments. We will have time to go through some, if not all of them, towards the end of it. But first off, I want to kick off with some top level questions about recent changes and sort of data as a whole before we go into detail about how we can actually adapt and amplify our campaigns. Ben, what I'd like to do is introduce yourself, Jack and Alex to the panel discussion. And Ben, starting off with yourself, mate, I want to cover the different types of data, that we as marketers have access to. I'm sure a lot of the people who are watching, understand the sort of data that they have and what they've got access to. But, when we're talking about that, for those who might not know, can you just sort of go over, what is the difference between sort of first, second and third party data?
Cool. Yeah, no problem, Kieran. So personally, I really enjoyed the talk, Kylie. That's the first time I've seen that as well. So some really interesting points there. I guess on the types of data, and just to be really clear that obviously cookies and data, so third-party cookies and third-party data are not the same thing, and I've gone to explain that. Personally, I'm not particularly, I know it's obviously going to be a massive challenge and disruption for our industry, but I'm not particularly sad personally about the demise of third-party cookies and cookie-based tracking, because I don't think it was ever really as accurate as it was made out to be. And I think this whole thing has helped us to rethink how we do business online and how we are really clear with consumers about how we capture and use their data. And for me, it comes down to hopefully less reliance on third-party data, which is the data that you can access via third parties, and more around building up your own first-party data. So just to quickly touch on the difference between the two. So first party I would classify as known data. So this is the gold standard, and what I would say is going to be the future for people to invest in the businesses. I think for too long we've been relying on companies such as, to be honest, Facebook, Google, ad tech providers to access their huge database of audience. And that's going to become more difficult, as Kylie's gone to explain. So a simple example of first party data: opted in newsletter subscribers, data that you collect in your CRM, and people who have consented to be marketed to effectively. It's limited in scale compared to the second and third party data that you'd be able to access through Facebook and Google, but it's much richer and more valuable once it's collected. Second party data is essentially someone else's first party data. So that, as an example there, that's the data that Facebook would have on page likes and their audience that from their platform that advertisers can use for targeting. And third-party data is offered by companies who are not the original collector of the data, but it's available through another platform. So as an example, not necessarily Facebook, but Google Ads offer brands access to third-party data in the form of their Google Display Network's publisher data. That's an example of third-party data. And just to make the point as well, third-party data and third-party cookies are not the same thing. So you will still, third-party data isn't going away, third-party cookies obviously will be impacted.
So, I mean, that's great. Thanks very much, Ben. So you mentioned then about that gold standard. So first party data is the data we collect as marketers that we have sort of access and control over. And then sort of second party is the same, but someone else would store it. And then third party data is when someone else has gone and sort of done that sort of research, and maybe you can tap into aspects of it to enhance campaigns. I mean, you mentioned then, Ben, about, the third party data and third party cookies not being the same, as well, sort of, a lot of marketers who are comfortable on Facebook use the third party data for ad targeting. Can you just go into a little bit more detail about how they differentiate?
So a third-party cookie is a cookie placed on someone's device by a website from a domain other than the one someone is using. Whereas obviously third-party data is something that someone can actually access through another platform. So for example, in the past, I think Facebook used to have third-party data from Experian, and I can't remember the other companies you could access on there. So you could essentially use another company's data through Facebook to target people. I know that's been phased out recently, but that's the real difference. Technically, I think from what I understand, Kaidi, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, companies, as long as it complies with the custom audience requirements, you can still purchase third-party data from another company and upload it as a custom audience in Facebook, as long as it complies and the way you've collected that data complies with the custom audience kind of requirements.
Amazing. And what about people with first party, for custom audience targeting? Can they still use that? And also as well, just to tag onto that, Ben, what happens if people are sitting here at home or in the office watching this and they don't have any first party data?
Yeah, I think now's the time, and this is a lot of what we're talking about at the moment, is for businesses to invest in a first party data strategy. So going back to Kaidi's point there around value exchange and actually offering consumers something in exchange for their data, making it really transparent about how you're going to use it and the benefit they'll get from giving it to you. I don't think it's just about saying we're going to use it for personalizing content and advertising, because that's what everyone's saying. I think the companies that are doing a really good job of this are those that are offering exclusives and loyalty programs, rewards, for example, in exchange for that data. They're able to, through personalization, provide those rewards, but that's the real gold standard. So examples that have been around for years, Boots, for example, the Advantage card, Sainsbury's with Nectar, for example, that's a really good example of why you're getting something back in exchange for essentially giving them your data every time you buy something. You kind of tied into that. So if you start from scratch and you've got no first party data, I think that the place to start is probably your own database and building that out through in your CRM, through maybe content marketing, email, newsletters and things like that, loyalty programs. Yeah, it's about giving your customers something in return and slowly trying to build up your own bank of owned data that you can then use in platforms like Facebook to leverage their targeting to kind of expand your audience. So you'd upload your own data. Facebook would then be able to match that with customers on the platform, and you'd be able to expand that way.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you going over the differences there, Ben. It's as marketers, we often hear this data, that data, and we sort of know what we've got, but to be able to articulate that, I appreciate it, and also the usage as well. What I want to do is, Jack, I want to ask you a little bit about sort of, at Hallam, what changes are we actually making to our overall page strategy to combat these, if you like, lesson targeting, availabilities?
Yeah, I mean, outside of what Ben's already gone over in developing our own kind of first party heavy tactics, a lot of what we're doing with the way that we're actually building campaigns out starts at the very top with the overall strategy. So we're pivoting the way that we build campaigns to focus a lot more on the creative and the storytelling as a way to filter people out. So as the targeting isn't as granular as it used to be, and we're kind of getting broader audiences that don't potentially perfectly fit as they have in the past, creative is the best way to not only filter out people that aren't right for the ad and would waste spend and would come through to the landing page and bounce, but by using the right creative that kind of hits the right people at the right time, as Kaidi mentioned, it's the perfect way to really boost performance and boost volume of conversions and performance if you are hitting people with the right story based on where they are in kind of the journey, the intention funnel.
Yeah, no, I think that's super important as well. I think, I was a paid social practitioner for many years, and the campaigns, I'm sure Alex, you'll be able to relate to this as well. The campaigns where you really sort of put that research in early on to understand your customers more and understand their pain points and that user journey you mentioned then. And really take that into account throughout those ads. It makes a massive difference to sort of the performance of any campaign. Jack, with that sort of model that you just mentioned, then what is the impact on performance that we're seeing right now?
Obviously, it's still quite early days. We're seeing kind of increases in CPCs and CPAs and drop-offs in reporting on the performance. I think the biggest thing that is important to know is that it's not necessarily that campaigns are performing poorly or the performance has dropped off. It's that we don't have reporting to the accuracy level that we had in the past. So there was a blog recently that was shared by Facebook that estimates that it's under-reporting sales and wider conversions by 15%. So it's the kind of thing where time will tell as you see the actual effect and you year-on-year comparisons and you look at the historical data. But as it stands right now, we can assume that it's at least 15% in terms of underreported performance.
Okay, amazing. No, thanks very much. Ben, I'm going to come to you to talk about value exchange before we move on to Alex and get into sort of the tactics. But Cardi, I'd just like to come back to you. There's a couple of questions around sort of, how does the privacy program at Facebook work? If you could give us some insight on that, and also, what sort of privacy ad controls does Facebook offer?
Yeah, sure thing. So at Facebook, we honor people's privacy in everything that we do. And with that in mind, in 2019, we set up the Privacy Review Program that guides the product teams that are working on all the features for ads and commerce and Oculus and WhatsApp, etc., to make the right decisions on privacy. And so each product team has an independent privacy program manager, so people like me, who is assessing the product team's proposals for potential privacy harms and risks. And it's then their job to guide the product teams to designing the products with privacy in mind, obviously in accordance with the legislation such as the GDPR. Yeah. So, for example, when we're developing the ads products at Facebook, it's the privacy team who are ensuring that there are the relevant user settings that enable users to have those relevant controls in place to manage their data, and that there is sufficient transparency. So some of you may have seen the 3 dots on the ads that link to why am I seeing this ad, that actually go into the ads you see and how you control it. So Kieran, you asked about what ad controls the privacy Facebook offers. So there are 2 types of controls for privacy, and the user-facing controls and the business side controls. So Ben went into those earlier very lightly, but to pick up on that. So the user-facing controls enable users to opt out of their third-party data sharing and to opt out of the off-Facebook activity that Ben described. So these are things that, like the Facebook pixel tracking. And the off-Facebook activity lets users to see a summary of the apps and websites that send Facebook information about their activity and giving users the ability to clear this information from their account. And so to go a little bit more into the business side controls. So again, what Ben said earlier, there are ways that you as businesses can actually ensure secure data transfer between Facebook and your business. So these are things like using the Facebook SDK, using the App Events API and the Conversions API. And again, some of the things that the panelists have already touched upon, you could also use your own CRM for sourcing some of that data.
Amazing. Yeah, no, makes sense. I think it's always interesting, not just as a marketer, but as anyone who uses social media who receives those ads, just to sort of check out that why is it showing to me, and sort of look at those interests as well. You can have you can have a good giggle sometimes. Ben, just over to yourself, mate, before we jump into the tactics with Alex. Most of us have mentioned at some point sort of providing value to the user as part of that sort of user journey, making sure we're using data in the right way. A term that we throw around quite a lot, Hallam, is value exchange. Would you like to just expand on that for the audience?
Yeah, okay, cool. So I guess a way to describe it is most of the internet is free. It's got a lot of stuff that you can get and access without paying anything at all. But in reality, there's a deal happening every time you access a piece of content online, and that's that advertisers are funding that content by paying for the ads on many websites, including, Facebook, Google. They make, obviously money from advertising. And the way, obviously, to make that more specific, the users benefit from that is obviously more relevant content, personalization, the kind of stuff that Kaidi mentioned. But I think now that users are catching on to the fact that advertisers are kind of profiting from their data, and some platforms are obviously also benefiting as a result, they want more in return. So there's a great example of a company like an actual browser-based plugin that's offering a value exchange. I don't know if anyone's watched Dragon's Den, but I'd advise maybe researching a recent Dragon's Den pitch from a company called Generate, who essentially offered internet users the ability to earn money and reward points in return for giving their data to publishers as they're browsing the web. It's a really simple explanation of what value exchange is. You're effectively giving the user points in direct return for giving advertisers access to their data. So if anyone wants to make a note of that, I'd probably watch that Generate Dragon's Den pitch. That's a really good example of very explicit value exchange. There's other examples. Gated content is an example. You're giving someone, you'd all have to do it if you see an article that's really in depth, a white paper or an ebook that someone spent hours writing. The thing you're giving them in return is your data, and you're getting access to the piece of content. But obviously then you've given their data, they can probably market to you in the future and make use of that.
Yeah, I think that's the key thing as well with anyone who is using that sort of tactic, whether that be through paid media or search. If you are having that sort of gated content and you are collecting maybe an email address and a little bit of information from that, I suppose the value exchange that you need to implement is what is that sort of short to long term value exchange after that person downloads that white paper or that ebook. Giving them one thing, it's not going to keep you top of mind for very much. So, a lot of the campaigns that we build are very much intact with what is that consistent value exchange after that point, once they've already handed over their data, basically using their data with respect and making sure that the content you put in front of them along that sort of buyer cycle or user journey is still valuable to them at that point as well. Cool. Alex, jumping into sort of the optimization and things like that, if I want to optimize my campaigns for success without having as much sort of customer-centric data available to me, how could I try and do that?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and I think it's an ongoing discussion. And I think anyone who's actively ran any campaigns in the past year, 6 months to year, will have likely dramatically seen a lot of their custom audiences and retargeting audiences significantly reduce as a result of a lot of the privacy changes that have come into effect, iOS 14, which is why people are looking to implement the Conversions API, the SDK, and things like that. And I think the key thing is to be able to focus on what you can control, because to a certain extent, you're not really able to control those drops in your audience volumes. You can build out your first party data, but in the short term, there's not much you can control in terms of those audiences diminishing. So I think one of the key things that a lot of advertisers have seen success with is being broader, which kind of directly contradicts the desire for more personalization. But in the short term, it's quite difficult to personalize when you lack the data. So I think it's about trying to find who you are and why you stand out in a market, and telling as many people that as you possibly can, and differentiating yourself from your competitors by, as Jack alluded to, having solid creatives, trying to use tailored messaging where you can, and having a really clear narrative of what you are, why you are good at what you do, and why someone should invest their time in you. I mean, 91% of people still want personalized ads. It's not that consumers don't want ads anymore. They just want things that are relevant. Yeah. So if you can find audiences that work, or if you have to be broad because of that, then you need to focus on people that engage with your brand and build out that. One key thing that we've been doing is focusing on upper funnel activity. So obviously with the reduction in retargeting audiences, it's just the actual volume there has obviously dropped. So it's much easier to focus on what traditionally would be a higher CPA audience of prospecting and upper funnel activity to just drive consumers to your site that you can then get into the funnel with your other paid activity as well.
Yeah, I think one of the things that so many points to sort of ask you about there, Alex. I think first off, you mentioned about sort of that use of data during the campaign, making sure that you're putting it out there, you can optimize. Obviously, campaigns are rich with data, and any marketer who presses that big green launch button and then sort of walks away from a campaign is definitely doing it wrong. There's so much data at our fingertips now once that campaign's live to make those changes and give it the best possible chance of success. In terms of sort of leaning on that data beforehand as well, we touched on potentially even using third-party data to understand your sector more, audience more, just to give you that better chance of making sure those messages that you are putting out there might land, and then sort of lean on that campaign data to optimize. Getting an ROI across social media ads is something which is knocked about quite a lot, isn't it? And I think it's interesting you mentioned then about making sort of that top level and almost looking at it with a sort of single customer view, that omni-channel approach across different paid media. I know one of the things that we're doing at Hallam is looking into sort of the LTV of customers and what that lifetime value is once that person does make that purchase, and how to relate those models back. So next up, Alex, privacy constraints, we're getting more restricted. I think everyone will admit to that, and we are finding ways around it. But will the access to attribution be limited, and is there a way to sort of circumvent that?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is access to attribution is becoming far more limited, purely because of the data that we are able to access is slightly reduced. But again, I think there are ways to not necessarily completely circumvent it, but to try and give yourself a more cohesive picture of what's actually working. I mean, I think paid social in itself has gone through a transition in the past 5 years from it's very fluffy and drives no return on investment to, it drives return on investment, and it's kind of going the other way again with the lack of that attribution. But there's a myriad of ways that you can probably look to try and counteract that 15% of underreporting that Jack spoke about earlier, which obviously can vary from client to client. And I think the key thing is to understand your tracking and try and track across not just the platform that you're looking at. One key way to do this, if you're not doing it, is using UTMs. Anyone that isn't actively using UTMs on your campaigns is automatically not seeing the full picture. Obviously, UTMs only ever work on click-based traffic. So again, that is another half of the battle. But there are a lot of other tactics that you can try and implement to more accurately assess view-through traffic and things like that. The use of bespoke landing pages exclusively for social is definitely a really useful tactic. So if you're, as Ben was saying earlier, offering something exclusive, or you're running exclusive content, or you want to drive people to a specific offer, a really good way to do that, which I know search does quite frequently, is by having a bespoke landing page that all the traffic that lands there is going to be from social. And then within your analytic platforms and within your commerce managers, it's really easy to see that even if there's a drop off in your activity through the platform reporting, these landing pages are only accessible when specific things are triggered, i.e. the UTMs or the clicks from your social activity. So it tries to knit that picture together a little bit better for any of that underreporting. And then similarly, as I sort of just touched on, using your actual e-commerce platforms themselves, a lot of them have direct integrations with Facebook, but a lot of them also allow you to monitor the URLs and the UTMs that are coming through. So I would always recommend check if there's a discrepancy, because if your commerce platform is showing a much higher UTM usage from your social, your Facebook campaigns than you're seeing in platform, then it might be worth assessing that reporting as opposed to entirely looking at the reporting in platform itself.
Yeah, one of the interesting things that you touched on then, Alex, was sort of the landing page and how important that can be for a campaign. I think a lot of people who are running ads, whether that be Facebook or any paid media ads, is in my opinion anyway, I think on the whole they don't put as much sort of effort into the optimization of that landing page as they do into their ads. And you know, they might be looking going, why is my ROAS not great when I'm driving all this traffic? And a simple answer is it's probably the landing page and not the campaign in most cases. Ben, just jumping back to yourself, mate. Me and Alex, then we obviously mentioned about sort of that omni-channel approach, and Alex went into a little bit of detail about how you can track that. You know, if we were to go a little bit broader, you know, how can I see which campaigns work across multiple networks?
That's going to become, because obviously most platforms rely on cookie-based tracking and identifiers right now. So that's the challenge that we've all got. That's for me the biggest challenge that's facing marketing and digital marketing for the next couple of years. Obviously Safari, Firefox, you know, Apple iOS 14 and the app tracking blocking. Google from, I think it's 2023 now, they've pushed it back to, in terms of blocking cookie-based tracking. So obviously that was really useful to providing that view across different platforms as to what's working and what's not. With that going, I think we're in a state of flux. I think Kaidi's really useful presentation there about some of the things that Facebook are doing. And I actually made a note of one of the points around the privacy enhancing technologies and some of the stuff that you're doing around building tech that works across platforms with additional publishers, which I hadn't seen before. So I need to probably read some more about that, because I think cross-platform measurement is the thing that's going to be impacted most of all. Obviously, Google, you know, privacy enhancing technology from a Facebook perspective, Google have got their FLoC and Privacy Sandbox initiative, which is in their side. And I think these two areas for me would be like great in the platform. So you'd be able to see in Google what's worked and what hasn't. You'd be able to still see in Facebook what's worked and what hasn't. But it doesn't really answer that bigger challenge of what's worked across different platforms. And if you look in Google and they're telling you one thing, you look in Facebook, they're telling you one thing, and actually the data when you put it together doesn't marry up. So there's a few different things that are being discussed at the moment. There's universal identifiers, use of universal ad identifiers, which is being looked at, and it's still in testing as another solution to that. Obviously, that would be very similar in the way it works in terms of tracking users across the web, but without cookies. So you'd still get similar data what we'd have from cookies, but in a different way. I'm not quite sure that goes far enough from a user privacy perspective. But it's one thing that's being discussed. What was the other thing? So I was reading again, we've got a couple of clients trialing, what was I going to say? Data clean rooms, sorry. So there's a Google ad. If you're on Google Ads, for example, you spend a hell of a lot of money in there using your first party data to match your own data with data from platforms. Again, is available from data clean rooms. That wouldn't necessarily give you the cross-platform measurement solution that you'd be used to from cookies. So I guess in short, Kieran, it's going to be a massive challenge. And I think we're going to have to be more comfortable with kind of more projections rather than the precision we've been used to in the past few years. I think you'll still have potential solutions being developed by Facebook, being developed by Google, being developed by various ad platforms, but that solution that works across them and gives you that holistic view, I'm yet to see something that's going to give us that at this stage.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good point. And you know, we've sort of touched on the fact that sort of cookies are, you know, becoming harder to use. Alex, I know you've got some points on potentially even utilizing like the server side of things instead, with sort of IPI conversions. Would you like to just expand on that a little bit, mate?
Yeah, of course. So I mean, obviously with cookies diminishing, I think that's been an issue for a long time, with ad blockers, cookie blockers, VPNs, and other masking tools that have increased in their volume over the past few years. But obviously with the implementation of iOS 14, ITP, and all the other essentially cookie blockers that are coming into play, I think what a lot of platforms are moving to is server-side tracking, which obviously works in tandem with pixels. So it's essentially using data from both aspects. So using browser events, and where browser events aren't available due to a lack of cookies, using actual events that happen within the website's backend on the server to not necessarily identify who someone is, but identify what happens in terms of, are they looking at a page? So has a page view happened? Has someone purchased? It doesn't necessarily give you all of the other information, and there's a lot more anonymity to it. But one of the key benefits of also implementing the Conversions API from Facebook, for example, is you're able to see a lot more of a longer picture. So when we come back to that lifetime value that we've been talking about, you're able to see events that maybe happen after purchase. So do people subscribe? Do people have, or does a user who does X, and X have more of a chance of having a better lifetime value? And by building that out in your first party data, obviously over time, we'll have at least a little bit more control over this. It is, as Ben said, just how all of the different platforms work to put that together, which hopefully some of the PETs should do. But I guess we'll see what happens over the next few years.
Yeah, I think you know, that point of being able to understand even, like, you know, those touch points which will give a more probable you know, better LTV, would that's, mate, if a marketer can hack into that kind of data and information, the future campaigns are going to be very geared up for success. We've got about 5 minutes left, and there's a couple of questions that I've still got to ask, two in particular. First one, Kaidi, I'm going to come back to you about Alex just mentioned PETs. Now, we have had a question from the audience about PETs. Jardil from the audience asked about, is there a place for blockchain technology to support those? I'm not sure if we're in a position to answer that, but you know, what I really want to get into is how a PET is actually enhancing, you know, that privacy focused digital advertising at Facebook.
Yeah, sure. So given privacy enhancing technologies actually minimize the amount of data that is processed to help protect this personal information, we believe that this is the next generation of digital advertising. And like I said, we're really investing heavily in an effort to develop and build those solutions at Facebook. So I've provided Kieran with a link that I think he might be sharing alongside with the recording, so you can read a little bit more about it there.
Amazing, thanks so much. And yes, I will include the links to everything that the team has mentioned. We're going to be popping this up on YouTube, and also we'll send that out via email. I think last question of the day, Jack, one for yourself, mate. And you know, feel free to go into detail on this. We've got a little bit of time, and it's quite open-ended. But what is changing in the day-to-day for a typical marketing paid media manager?
Well, Alex is definitely the best one to answer this one, being hands-on so much more than I am. But I think, first of all, the biggest thing is going to be kind of daily check-ins on performance and optimization are going to drop off. I think we're not going to see instant performance and kind of returns. It's going to have to be something where you take a much bigger view in terms of the data that we're looking at and the date ranges, just because of the impact on attribution. I think obviously you've also got to kind of take into consideration the bigger changes when it comes to the windows that you're looking at on performance data. And then, as Ben's mentioned, the kind of huge key to all of it is going to be first party data and pulling all of that information that you own yourself. You're not relying on third party data. You're not relying on kind of data that's bought in from another source. Developing your own strategy and really using that as the absolute baseline of all activity is going to be the key to driving all of the performance.
Alex, just to chip in on that, Kieran, as well, Jack makes some great points. Alex's point earlier about actually not being as, I guess, not focusing so much on efficiency with your ad targeting and what's in Facebook generating the best possible ROI. I think going back to some kind of fundamental marketing principles about reaching more people and constantly bringing new people in to see the brand. For example, I think that's worth mentioning, and actually being a bit more broader with your targeting and seeing whether you can actually cut through and reach new users that way, rather than just relying on the precision we've been used to. Is gonna, I'd probably recommend testing that alongside some of the other things we've talked about.
Yeah, and again, just to sort of build on that, I think what the key thing is, if you are being more broad, it doesn't necessarily mean you should stop testing things. Which I think is the danger, because if you're going to be broader with what you're doing, you kind of just leave it as an umbrella approach and let it run. But I think if anything, testing is far more important now. You just need to test in different ways. So obviously, historically, you'd be able to break absolutely everything out. So are we going to target this specific ad format or this specific ad format or this placement on Facebook versus a different placement? And I think over time, that kind of testing has yielded worse results than testing more at direct user level. So what the user is ultimately seeing around the creative, around the copy that goes alongside the creative, and whether your messaging needs to change depending on whether you're going really broad or slightly less broad. And I think having a solid framework in place to understand what does work at what instance and what doesn't work at what instance will also let you improve continually for a longer period of time.
Yeah, I think if anyone is running ads about testing, they need to reconsider how they're doing things for sure. Right, listen, we're getting close to time now. It's been an absolute pleasure to be your host today. As mentioned, if you've heard anything worth sharing, please be sure to tag Hallam and Facebook into any posts on social and use the hashtag #ThriveOnline. We'll be sending out some comms either later this week or next week with the link to the documents that the team have mentioned today. And we'll also showcase this event as an on-demand YouTube video so that you can share it with your wider teams if you think it's relevant and useful. So that's it. I'd like to thank the amazing Cardi Keycast, the ever-interesting Ben Wood, the man of metrics, Jack Brown, and the optimization king, Alex Jackson. But more importantly, I'd like to thank you all who are watching at home or in the office for joining us today. I hope you've learned some great takeaways, as I have. If you have any questions about what you've heard, please be sure to get in touch with one of the panelists or myself. If you want to drop me a line, you can do at it's info@hallam.co.uk about any data or optimization questions as well. Thank you, and that's a wrap. Thank you very much, guys.